So in today's video, we're going to paint this cute cozy character. I'll do this with my usual technique, so it's very beginner friendly. But I'll also highlight a new trick I'm using that's making my artwork much cleaner, and also a new technique for painting the fuzzy hood. As usual, you can find a list of all the brushes and textures I'm using here in the description, along with a free download for the sketch and color palette so you can follow along with me. So the first thing I need to do is fill out the main color from the color palette of each element in this illustration, and I'll start with the hat as an example. So I'll do a long press to grab this red color. For the brush, I'm going to use the abstract round brush from the regular watercolor kit, and I'm just going to loosely and roughly fill it in. Now since I've gone beyond the sketch, I'm going to use the eraser brush, which is set to the fine liner pen brush, and I'm just going to go along the edge and cut it back. And I'm going to go through the whole illustration just like this and create each element on its own layer by itself. And I won't do the hood in this case because that's kind of a separate technique I want to show you how to do later on. So once all the background colors for each element here are filled in, you can see here in the layers panel that they're each on their own layer and they sort of fit together almost like puzzle pieces. And this is a kind of a painting technique that I use in almost all of my videos, but it has a common problem that I've only recently figured out how to fix. So if I turn off the sketch here, you can see that in certain areas, the pieces don't fit together perfectly and there's a slight white line. And I think you'll find in some areas like this, it sort of looks okay, but in other areas, personally in my opinion, it doesn't look so good. And an easy way to fix this is surprisingly to use the liquify tool. So in this case, the scarf looks pretty good. It looks like the mistake is in the jacket. So I'm going to make sure the jacket layer is the one that's selected. Then I'm going to go to my adjustments. I'll go to liquify. I'm going to make sure it's set to push. I'm going to make sure pressure is maximum, distortion is none, and also momentum is none as well. Then you can set the size of this tool. And basically, it lets you warp and bend things. So what I'm going to do is just warp the jacket so that this gap gets filled in. So I'm going to go through the whole illustration and try to fix this as best as I can. Now if you're doing this and you're using the liquify tool, but it's not warping, it's not working at all, double check that you've got the correct layer selected, because this tool will only affect the layer that's selected. And as you can see, the results of this are pretty subtle, but it definitely looks cleaner now. Next, I'm going to move on and do the hood, so I'll need to turn the sketch back on. And I want to do the hood on its own layer, but I'm going to make sure it's the very bottom layer, so basically below everything we've painted so far. And I've discovered that if I use a default Procreate brush under the painting tab, it's called dry brush, I can actually get a really nice fuzzy effect if I use just a couple of shades of gray, kind of medium gray and light gray, and basically just scribble around like this. And this brush is very directional, so I'm going to try to use it kind of in the direction of where I imagine the fur to be going. And I'm going to do this kind of over and over again, changing the color just only once in a while, going from again a very dark gray to a medium gray and then a light gray. And I think that step and using that dry brush is pretty intuitive. The only trick is I was trying to use the darker grays towards the inside and the lighter grays towards the outside, so I have a nice kind of curved shaded effect. Now even though the hood is on its very own layer, kind of in the back of everything, it's still showing through some of these elements. And you can see here if I turn off the hat, the hood is basically going beyond the sketch and kind of going behind where it shouldn't. So I'm going to turn off these other elements here, use the eraser brush, and cut back the hood exactly like how I did kind of in the first step here when I painted the background colors, and then cut them out to match the sketch a little bit better. And next, if I turn everything else back on and the sketch off, you can see I have a little bit of the same issue I had also in the first steps. I'm getting that white line. So I'm going to use the liquify tool once again to fix that. And once I've got sort of the foundation of all the elements in this illustration laid down, I like to move on and start adding the surface textures. So I'll use the hat as an example. I'm going to make sure the hat layer is selected. I'll make a new blank layer just above it. And then to do the details, I'll use the fine liner pen and just a couple different shades of kind of a light red and a dark red. And that looks pretty good. The reason I do the details on their own layer is so I can adjust the opacity just in case I want to kind of lighten that effect. And I'll set it to a point where it's just barely visible. There we go. And then to just keep everything organized, I'm going to pinch it together with the hat layer so the details in the hat are on the same layer. And I'm going to go through the illustration and use this same technique to add the details on the scarf and the jacket. And the last of the details I'm going to add are the face details. So again, I'll make a blank layer above the face. I'm going to do all the face details with the fine liner pen. I guess the only trick is the eyes, so I'll show you that now. I like to do it sideways. I find it's easier to paint these. And I'll start with pure white. And to make it easier to see this, I'm going to lower the opacity of my sketch. Now I'm going to outline the eyes in pure black. And the trick to this is, again, use that fine liner pen at a really small size. And in the corner of the eye, press very lightly. And then as I go over the top, I'm pressing harder and then tapering it off. And this might be just a personal kind of thing with me, but I really think this gives the eye a nice look. And I'm going to go through the face just like this on this same layer, just using the fine liner pen and adding all these little details. Now I want to add a kind of ombre red effect to the ears and the nose. So to do that, I'm going to make sure the layer with the face here is selected, not the one with the details, but with the background color. And I'm going to use the freehand selection tool. And I'm going to circle just the edges of the ears and then the nose. Then I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'm going to shift these until I get a kind of reddish tone. There we go. Now the edges here are quite harsh. So I'm going to use the water blender at a really small size to kind of soften that transition. And that's looking pretty good. And the last detail I want to add on the face is some dark circles under the eyes. So to do that, I want to make sure the background layer for the face is selected. Then I'm going to use the selection tool set to freehand. And I'll just circle both of those areas. Then I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'll just slightly darken it. And that's definitely an optional detail, but I really like to add it because it's something I see in a lot of Irville's artwork, and I think it looks really nice. Now at this point the illustration is nearly done. All we need to do is add a couple of shadows to make it really pop. So to do that, I'm going to turn off the sketch, and then I'm going to merge all the layers we've painted on so far onto one layer. Then I'll do all the shadows a little differently this time. Usually I use the freehand selection tool to do them, but this time I want to show you another method. So for that, I'm going to make a blank layer that's above our character. I'm going to use the fine liner pen brush and some kind of dark gray tone like that. I think that's pretty good, and I'll use this as an example. So I'm going to paint on this dark gray color here, and it's a little bit hard to see, but don't worry. Now I did it on this layer, this blank layer above the guy here. I'm going to change the transparency mode from normal to multiply, and you're really going to see the shadows pop out. So I'm able to just draw shadows just on this layer, and you can see it just darkens everything below it. And once I've got a couple of shadows there as an example here, I can just lower the opacity of the shadow layer here, and this is what controls the strength of those shadows. So I think that looks pretty good on the jacket. The only remaining shadow is just around the ears. Mostly I'm looking at the contrast here in the illustration, and it looks pretty good here, but around the ears it's a little bit soft. So I'm going to carefully draw on a shadow to kind of bring that out a little bit. And I think also on the nose here it could use a little bit of help. And just like that, our cozy winter character is all done. And here's a closer look at the final result. And that pretty much wraps it up. If you think I've earned it, please give this video a like. If you're looking for some more character illustration tutorials just like this one, I think you'll like these two videos next.